Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. My name is Dr. Jake Harrison, and I need to tell you what we found beneath the ice. Not because I think it will change anything. Not because I believe anyone can stop what's coming, but because they left as a message across 250,000 years, and the least we can do is listen. It's November 2025 now, and I haven't slept properly in 3 months. Every time I close my eyes, I see those walls, those faces carved in stone, that final chamber where they sealed themselves away from a world that was ending. I see the last line of text carved so small we almost missed it, the one that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. This started in August, at the beginning of what should have been another routine Antarctic season. My 12th deployment to the Ross Ice Shelf, extracting ice cores for climate research. Tedious work, brutal conditions, the kind of isolation that can break you if you let it. But there's something pure about it too, something that keeps drawing people like me back, year after year. Just you, your team, and the oldest ice on Earth, holding secrets from ages we can barely comprehend. My team that season was small but capable, the kind of people you trust with your life in a place that's actively trying to kill you. Dr. Parker Williams, a Canadian geophysicist with 15 years of experience reading radar scans like sheet music, could tell you what was under 2 miles of ice with unsettling accuracy. Dr. Paul Schneider, a meticulous German paleoclimatologist with 3 doctorates and a mind that never stopped analysing, could reconstruct ancient climates from the tiniest variations in ice composition. And Justin Torres, our drilling engineer from Texas, whose easy humour and unflappable competence kept us sane during the long polar nights when the darkness pressed in from all sides, and you started forgetting there was a world beyond the ice. We'd been on site for 6 weeks, falling into the rhythm that defines Antarctic research. Wake at 7 in the morning to a sunrise that never quite felt real. Breakfast of instant coffee that tasted like diesel and reconstituted eggs that had the texture of rubber. Suit up against cold that could kill you in minutes. Run the drills. Extract the cores with painstaking care. Analyze the samples under harsh fluorescent lights. Document everything in triplicate. Sleep. Repeat. The wind never stopped howling, a constant presence that became the soundtrack to our existence. The ice never stopped being white, stretching to every horizon, endless and indifferent. On August 15th, everything changed, though we didn't understand the magnitude of it at first. Parker was running our ground-penetrating radar sweep, mapping the subsurface geology for future drilling sites. Standard procedure. We'd done it hundreds of times, across dozens of locations. The radar would show us the layers of ice, any embedded rock, the occasional meteorite. Nothing surprising. Nothing that would make your blood run cold. But that afternoon Parker called us all into the equipment trailer with an urgency I'd never heard from him before. His usual calm completely shattered. The radar screen showed something at 9,000 feet that shouldn't exist. Not ice, which has a distinctive signature. Not rock, which shows up completely differently. Something with the wrong density entirely. Something that made the equipment readings fluctuate in ways that suggested our instruments were malfunctioning. Something geometric. Something vast. Something that had no business being there. Run it again, I told him, trying to keep my voice level. Could be equipment malfunction. The cold plays hell with electronics. Parker had already run it 3 times, checking every connection, recalibrating every sensor. The readings are consistent, Jake. There's a void down there. A big one, hundreds of feet across at minimum. And the walls, the boundaries of whatever this is, they're too regular to be natural. Too precise. Justin leaned over the monitor, his usual grin fading as he processed what he was seeing. The density readings make no damn sense. It's like finding a skyscraper buried under the desert. That's not geology. That's architecture. Paul was already calculating in his head, that distant look he got when his mind was processing multiple variables simultaneously. At 9,000 feet, the ice above it would be approximately 250,000 years old, give or take 10,000 years, depending on accumulation rates. Nothing human has ever been found at that depth. Nothing could survive that long. The pressure alone would crush any organic material to nothing. The ice would obliterate any structure through simple geological processes. Whatever this is, it predates our entire species by 100,000 years or more. Maybe it's compressed volcanic formations, I suggested, trying to find a rational explanation that didn't make my skin crawl. Unusual mineral deposits. We know there's geological activity under the ice. Could be a magma chamber that cooled in an unusual configuration. But even as I said it, I knew I was grasping at straws. The shapes on that radar screen were too precise, too purposeful, too clearly designed, rather than formed by natural processes. We spent 3 days debating whether to investigate, 3 days of argument and uncertainty. Our mandate was climate research, not archaeology. We'd have to get authorization from multiple agencies, rework our entire mission parameters, justify the time and expense to people who'd think we were chasing shadows. And there was always the risk that we'd find nothing, that we'd waste valuable time and resources chasing a radar ghost, an equipment glitch that would make us look like fools. But in the end, curiosity won, the way it always does with scientists, the way it probably always has throughout human history. We had to know. On August 18th, we began drilling toward the anomaly, modifying our deepest bore equipment for a precision descent. The drill chewed through the ancient ice, layer by layer, year by year, millennium by millennium. We passed through ice that fell as snow when Neanderthals walked Europe, when dire wolves hunted the American plains, through ice from the dawn of human civilization, from the building of the first cities, the invention of writing, the birth of recorded history, through ice that predated our entire species, that fell in a world our ancestors would never see, under skies we could only reconstruct through careful science. At 8,947 feet, the drill bit suddenly dropped 6 inches into nothing, the resistance vanishing so abruptly that Justin nearly lost control of the rig. "We've got a cavity," he reported, his voice tight with controlled excitement and something else. Something that might have been fear. "Hold position. I need to check the integrity before we go any further." We rigged up a camera system, nothing fancy, just a waterproof housing with LED lights and a fiber optic cable rated for extreme cold. Slowly, carefully, like we were defusing a bomb, we lowered it into the darkness below, into a space that had been sealed since before modern humans existed. The first images came through grainy and unclear, the lights reflecting off surfaces in ways that didn't make immediate sense. Then, Parker adjusted the contrast and sharpness, and we all fell silent, watching the monitor with the kind of attention you give to something that's rewriting your understanding of reality. Carved stone, black as midnight, surfaces polished so smooth they reflected our camera lights like mirrors. Architectural precision that shouldn't exist. Not here, not this deep, not this old, not created by anything we understood. Angles that were clearly intentional, measurements that spoke of planning and purpose, craftsmanship that rivaled anything humanity had ever produced. "That's not natural," Parker whispered, his face pale in the glow of the monitor. "That's built. That's designed. that's engineered by something intelligent. Paul's hands were shaking as he adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit he had when confronted with data that contradicted everything he knew. The geological context makes this impossible. Nothing could survive intact for that long. The ice flow alone should have destroyed any structure. The pressure should have crushed it to powder. But it's there. It's actually there. Justin broke the silence with the question we were all thinking. The question that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Who the hell builds a city under 2 miles of ice? And more importantly, why? What were they hiding from? Or what were they trying to hide? Over the next week, we expanded the borehole carefully, widening it enough to allow human access while trying not to compromise the integrity of whatever lay below. We lowered more cameras, different angles, better lighting. The structure below was massive, far beyond what the initial radar scans had suggested. Not a single building, but a complex that seemed to stretch for miles beneath the ice. A vast underground city carved from the living rock. Corridors wide enough to drive trucks through. Chambers with soaring ceilings that disappeared into darkness beyond our lights. Surfaces polished smooth by techniques we couldn't identify. Tools we couldn't imagine. A technology that left no trace of its methods. The architecture followed no cultural precedent I recognized, and I'd studied enough archaeology to know the major ancient civilizations. It wasn't Egyptian with their right angles and mathematical precision. It wasn't Mesopotamian with their ziggurat forms and clay construction. It wasn't anything in the archaeological record, anything humans had ever built or designed. The proportions were wrong for human habitation. Ceilings too high, corridors too wide, doorways shaped in ways that suggested different body mechanics. The angles didn't match human aesthetics. The golden ratio we unconsciously prefer was absent, replaced by proportions that felt alien, yet undeniably purposeful. Everything about it felt other, yet undeniably the work of intelligent beings who understood engineering and physics and the weight of stone. On August 25th, after days of preparation and safety checks, we made the decision to go down into the city ourselves, to put human eyes on something that hadn't been seen in 250,000 years. We rigged a winch system over the bore hole, industrial-grade equipment rated for rescue operations, and suited up in our cold weather gear with extra oxygen supplies and emergency beacons. Parker, Paul, and I would make the descent. Justin would stay topside, managing communications and monitoring our safety lines, ready to pull us out at the first sign of trouble. "You've got 6 hours of air," Justin reminded us as we clipped into the harness, his usual humour completely absent. "And guys, listen to me. If anything feels wrong down there, if anything at all sets off alarm bells, if you get even the slightest bad feeling, you come straight back up. No heroics, no pushing the limits. Promise me." I promised. We all did. Though I don't think any of us really believed we'd keep that promise if we found something extraordinary. Scientists are curious by nature, sometimes fatally so. Then we descended into the dark, leaving behind the last sunlight we'd see for days, dropping into a space that had been sealed since before humans learned to make fire. The winch lowered us slowly, our headlamps cutting through the blackness like knives, revealing glimpses of the bore hole walls where ancient ice had been cut away. The temperature dropped as we descended, colder than the surface somehow, as if the city below generated its own microclimate of preservation. The walls of the borehole gave way to open space, and then our feet touched solid ground for the first time in 250,000 years, standing where others had stood when the world was unrecognizably different. The chamber we'd entered was enormous, easily 100 feet across and half that high, the scale designed for beings who thought in larger terms than we did. Our lights barely reached the ceiling, the beam swallowed by distance and by the strange quality of the stone itself. The walls were covered in carvings, intricate and detailed, stretching in every direction as far as our lights could reach. Thousands upon thousands of images and symbols cut into the black stone with microscopic precision. "My God," Paul breathed, his voice echoing in the vast space. "This is real. This is actually real. Everything we know about human history, about the development of civilization, it's all wrong. We're not the first. We're not even close to being the first." We moved through the first corridor, our footsteps echoing strangely. The sound absorbed and reflected in ways that suggested the acoustic properties of the space had been carefully designed. The black stone absorbed light in an unsettling way, making our headlamps seem dimmer than they should be, as if the stone itself was hungry for illumination. Every surface was carved, decorated, documented with obsessive detail, no space left unadorned. Parker ran his hand along the wall, his engineer's mind trying to comprehend the construction. Whatever tools they used, they're beyond our current engineering capabilities. This stone is polished to a near mirror finish. That shouldn't be possible without modern grinding equipment, diamond-tipped tools, precision machinery. But this was done 250,000 years ago, when our ancestors were barely using shaped flint. The technical sophistication required for this is staggering. Who said anything about primitive? Paul was examining a carved panel that covered an entire wall, his headlamp moving across intricate details. "Look at this. These are astronomical charts, star positions, planetary orbits, eclipse calculations. But the precession is wrong. The Earth's axis wobbles on a 26,000-year cycle, changing which stars appear where in the sky. This is Earth's sky, but from an epoch we've never directly observed. This predates written human history by 200,000 years. These beings were doing sophisticated astronomy when our ancestors were prey animals on the African savanna. The carvings showed more than astronomy, telling a story in images that transcended language barriers. We found depictions of tall, slender figures with elongated limbs, perhaps 7 feet tall, humanoid but distinctly not human. Not quite human proportions, not quite human posture. Bipedal. Tool users, builders, artists, thinkers. They were shown standing in vast cities above ground. Cities with towers that seemed to scrape the sky, beneath constellations I didn't recognize, under stars arranged in patterns that no longer existed in our night sky. Structures that seemed to defy conventional engineering, arches that shouldn't support their own weight, buildings that appeared to float, technology rendered in stone that we couldn't begin to understand. They had cities, Parker said, his voice full of wonder and something like grief. A whole civilization, possibly multiple civilizations across continents. Culture, technology, art, science, and we never knew. How is that possible? How can an entire intelligent species disappear so completely that we find no trace of them? "Ice," Paul replied simply, gesturing upward toward the unimaginable weight above us. The ice sheets advance and retreat in cycles driven by orbital mechanics and solar output. At their maximum extent, they're miles thick, covering entire continents. The weight is incomprehensible. Mountains are ground to dust. Valleys are carved and recarved. The landscape is completely reshaped. After 250,000 years, nothing survives on the surface. Everything is erased, pulverized, scattered, buried under layers of glacial till. The ice is the perfect destroyer of evidence. We radioed our findings to Justin, who documented everything from above, recording our observations, cataloguing our photographs, maintaining the scientific record that would be all that remained if something went wrong. Then we pressed deeper into the complex, drawn forward by curiosity and by the growing sense that we were meant to find this place, that the builders had intended for someone someday to descend into their tomb and read what they had written. Over the next several days, we mapped as much of the complex as we could safely explore, and with each corridor we discovered, each chamber we illuminated, the scale became more apparent. The place was a labyrinth, corridor after corridor branching into more corridors, chamber after chamber opening into larger chambers, all carved with meticulous detail, all telling parts of a larger story. We were only scratching the surface, seeing perhaps 1% of what existed down here. The city extended far beyond our ability to explore it, possibly for miles in every direction, an entire civilization's final monument. But the deeper we went, the more the tone of the carvings changed in ways that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The early images showed prosperity, achievement, pride, cities in the sunshine, beings gathered in what looked like celebration, artistic works, scientific instruments, a golden age of culture and discovery. But gradually, over the course of hundreds of feet of carved corridors, a new theme emerged, creeping into the images like a shadow. The builders looking upward, their carved postures suggesting fear, arms raised not in celebration but in what looked like warding gestures. Something descending from above, rendered not as a solid object but as an absence, a void in the stone itself, negative space that hurt, to look at, even carved in relief. Then, images of masses gathered in enormous underground spaces, not the hundreds we'd seen in the earlier carvings, but thousands, tens of thousands, entire populations, not celebrating, not worshipping, not doing anything that suggested normalcy, preparing, waiting. The postures spoke of resignation, of acceptance, of a people who knew what was coming and had no way to stop it. Families grouped together, possessions abandoned. The finality of the images was crushing. The carvings get more desperate the deeper we go, Justin observed over the radio, watching our camera feeds from the surface, seeing what we were seeing. Like they were racing against time, like they knew they were running out of days and needed to finish the message before it was too late. The craftsmanship is still perfect, still precise, but there's an urgency to it that makes my skin crawl. On September 3rd, we found the first preserved remains, and I wish to God we hadn't. It was sealed in a crystalline formation, some kind of mineral deposit that had protected it from decay, a natural sarcophagus that had kept the body intact across epochs. The being was elongated, perhaps 7 feet tall. If it had been standing, though it was curled in a fetal position, arms wrapped around itself in a gesture that was heartbreakingly human. The limbs were thin, almost delicate, suggesting a biology adapted for efficiency rather than strength. The skull was larger than human, with eye sockets positioned slightly forward, suggesting binocular vision, a predator's arrangement, or perhaps a being that needed precise depth perception for detailed work. The hands had 6 fingers, each longer than human fingers, tipped with what might have been retractable claws or simply hardened nails. Parker collected samples with steady hands, scraping tiny amounts of tissue, taking measurements, documenting everything with scientific precision. But Paul and I hung back, uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. Paul refused to approach the remains closely, standing at the edge of the chamber with his arms wrapped around himself. "This is a tomb," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the still air. "We're walking through their grave. We should show respect. Whatever happened to them, whatever drove them down here, they deserve dignity and death. This isn't just archaeology. This is sacred ground." He was right, of course, though at the time I couldn't fully articulate why his words hit so hard. This wasn't just an archaeological site, another ruin to be catalogued and studied. It was a cemetery, a monument, a warning, a message in a bottle cast into an ocean of time, hoping someone would find it, hoping someone would understand. On September 5th, Paul made his breakthrough with the language. the moment when the dead began to speak to us directly. He'd been photographing every carved symbol we encountered, building a massive database of recurring characters, comparing them, looking for patterns in their distribution and usage. Working with linguistic specialists back home via satellite uplink, bouncing encrypted files back and forth, he began identifying patterns that suggested structure. Repetitions, variations that suggested grammatical cases or verb tenses, symbols that appeared in consistent positions relative to the pictorial elements, suggesting they were labels or captions or explanations. The linguistic team worked around the clock, bringing in experts in dead languages, in hieroglyphics, in cuneiform, in every ancient writing system humanity had ever deciphered. The breakthrough came from recognizing that the writing system was partially phonetic, partially logographic, using both sound symbols and meaning symbols in combination, similar to how Japanese uses both phonetic kana and ideographic kanji. The first words he decoded were simple but chilling, 3 words that changed everything: witness, preserved, approaching, and later, as more context became clear, a 4th word that made my blood run cold: inevitable. "We're not reading history books," Paul told us that night, his face pale in the harsh lights of our temporary camp deep in the complex, surrounded by carved walls covered in warnings we were only beginning to understand. "We're reading their final testament. This is what they wanted us to know. This is what they thought was important enough to carve in stone and bury under miles of ice. This is their message to whoever came after." "A testament to what?" Justin asked over the radio, his voice small and far away, made tiny by distance and by the weight of stone between us. "To whoever came next," Paul replied, his hands trembling as he sorted through his photographs, matching symbols to meanings, building a vocabulary from nothing. "To us. They knew they wouldn't survive. They knew their entire civilization was ending. So they built this place as a time capsule, as a warning, as a witness to the fact that they existed, that they tried, that they fought against something that couldn't be fought." We pushed deeper over the following days, driven by a need to understand that overrode our growing sense of dread. The psychological pressure was mounting in ways that had nothing to do with the physical environment. Parker developed severe headaches that he attributed to pressure changes, but I knew better because I was experiencing them too, a constant low-grade pain behind my eyes that painkillers barely touched. There was something about this place that weighed on you, something that made you feel watched, that made the darkness beyond your lights seem actively malevolent rather than merely absent of light. We all felt it, but none of us wanted to acknowledge it because acknowledging it would mean admitting that some things affect you on a level below rational thought. The carvings continued their terrible story, each corridor revealing more of the narrative, each chamber adding details to a picture we desperately didn't want to complete. We saw images of cities being abandoned in orderly fashion, not panicked flight but organized evacuation, possessions left behind, doors left open, as if the inhabitants planned to return but knew in their hearts they never would. A great migration underground. Millions of beings descending into prepared shelters, into spaces like this one carrying the remnants of their culture, their art, their knowledge. Families sealing themselves into chambers together, choosing to die as units rather than face separation in their final hours. And in the final images, rendered with heartbreaking clarity, darkness consuming the world above, the sun blotted out or perhaps the sky itself ceasing to exist, and the builders huddled in their tombs, waiting for an end that came slowly. On September 14th, we found the sealed doors, and I knew immediately they were important, knew it with a certainty that bypassed rational thought. They were massive, 30 feet high, and perhaps 10 feet wide, carved from single pieces of the black stone, which should have been impossible given their size. The engineering required to install them, to create hinges that could support that weight, to design seals that would remain tight across geological timescales, was staggering. But these were different from the other passages we'd traversed, covered in symbols that even we, with our limited understanding, could recognize as warnings. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, representing perhaps the pinnacle of their architectural achievement. After 250,000 years, the seams were still tight, the hinges still intact, the doors still perfectly balanced on their pivots. Paul translated the main inscription above the doors, his voice shaking as he read the words aloud, his headlamp illuminating symbols that had waited in darkness since before human language existed. Beyond lies the truth. May you be stronger than we were. Below that, in smaller script, another line. We sealed this knowledge for those who come after. May you use it more wisely than we did. May you find hope where we found only despair. Parker looked at me, his face shadowed in the uncertain light, his eyes reflecting fear and curiosity in equal measure. Maybe we should leave it sealed, Jake. They closed these doors for a reason. They didn't want whatever's beyond here to be accessible. Maybe that reason still applies. Maybe some knowledge is meant to stay buried. I knew he was right, knew it with every fibre of my being. Every instinct told me to turn back, to document what we'd found and leave the rest for others to discover or not discover. But we'd come so far, seen so much, and the need to know, that fundamental drive that makes us human, that makes us curious, that makes us reach for understanding, even when understanding might destroy us. That need was overwhelming. We can always seal it back up, Justin said over the radio, but his voice carried doubt, the understanding that some things, once learned, cannot be unlearned, that some doors, once opened, cannot be truly closed again. On September 16th, we opened the doors, and in doing so, changed the world, though the world doesn't know it yet, and maybe never will. The mechanism still worked after 250,000 years, a testament to engineering so sophisticated it made our best efforts look like children's toys. Ancient counterweights and levers, perfectly balanced, maintained in the dry air of the sealed complex. We barely had to push. The doors swung open silently, smoothly, as if they'd been maintained daily instead of abandoned for longer than human civilization has existed, revealing the chamber beyond. It was spherical, 200 feet in diameter, the ceiling curving away into darkness above, the floor dropping away below, accessible only by a narrow walkway that spiraled around the interior like a ribbon. Every inch of surface was covered in dense carvings, text, astronomical calculations, diagrams showing things I couldn't immediately identify, but that spoke of deep understanding of physics and cosmology. The craftsmanship was stunning, representing perhaps years or decades of constant labour by master carvers. This was their masterwork, their final statement, the sum total of everything they wanted us to know. At the centre stood a monolithic pillar, perhaps 40 feet tall and 10 feet wide, rising from the floor and reaching toward the apex of the sphere, connected to nothing, supporting nothing, serving only as a canvas. It was covered in the clearest, most detailed script we'd found anywhere in the complex, larger symbols that could be read from the walkway, smaller annotations that would require close examination. The pillar seemed to glow faintly in our lights, though that was probably just the polish of the stone, reflecting our headlamps. Paul's voice was barely a whisper, full of awe and terror in equal measure. This is their archive, everything they knew, everything they feared, everything they wanted us to understand. This is why they built this place. This pillar is the message. Everything else was just the envelope. We brought down portable floodlights, camping equipment, everything we needed to stay down here for days if necessary. Because we all understood instinctively that we couldn't rush this, that the message on that pillar was too important to skim, too carefully constructed to give it anything less than our complete attention. Justin wanted to come down too, but someone had to maintain the surface station, monitor the weather, keep our lifeline intact. He settled for watching through our helmet cameras, seeing what we saw, bearing witness from a distance. For 5 days we worked around the clock, photographing every surface, every symbol, every calculation, building a complete record of the chamber because we understood that we might not get another chance, that the complex might collapse, or we might be pulled out by authorities, or any number of things might happen to cut our access short. Paul led the translation effort, working with a growing team of linguists via satellite uplink, the academic world mobilizing to help decode the message, though we told them nothing about the context, just sent them symbol strings and asked for meanings. Slowly, painfully, like assembling a vast jigsaw puzzle where most of the pieces were missing, the message became clear, and with each new section translated, our sense of dread deepened. The builders had been a civilization that flourished 250,000 years ago, in the warm period between ice ages when Earth's climate was mild and stable. They'd risen from primitive beginnings, just as we had, probably from some earlier primate species, though their evolutionary path had been different, producing beings taller and more slender than humans would eventually become. Developed language through the same pressures of social cooperation, invented tools through the same needs to manipulate their environment, discovered agriculture, allowing population growth, built cities that grew from villages. The parallels to human development were striking, and suggested that intelligence might follow similar paths regardless of which species achieves it. They'd built cities across multiple continents during their golden age, which had lasted for thousands of years. We found maps carved into the walls, showing land masses that matched Earth's geography from that epoch, coastlines that had long since changed, mountain ranges worn away by time, islands that were now underwater or absorbed into larger continents. Their cities had been concentrated in tropical and temperate zones, avoiding the polar regions that would eventually become their tomb. The maps showed trade routes suggesting global commerce, political boundaries suggesting nations or city-states, the infrastructure of a complex, interconnected civilization. Their technology had advanced rapidly once they achieved scientific methodology. Paul translated descriptions of achievements that rivaled or exceeded our own. They'd understood genetics before we existed, had deliberately modified crops and animals for better yields, medicine that could treat diseases we still struggle with, engineering that allowed them to build structures 1,000 feet tall without steel or concrete. They'd achieved spaceflight, primitive by our standards, but functional, had established stations in orbit, had walked on their moon, had sent probes to other planets in the solar system. They'd reached beyond their world, looked out at the cosmos with sophisticated telescopes, and marveled at what they saw, believing themselves to be alone, believing they were the universe's first attempt at consciousness. They'd thought themselves the masters of their domain, the pinnacle of creation, the inevitable endpoint of evolution. They'd had philosophers who debated their place in the cosmos, religions that placed them at the center of divine attention, scientists who believed they were close to understanding everything, to achieving a complete theory of physical law. They'd had pride and ambition and hope for a future that stretched millions of years ahead. Then, their astronomers discovered they were wrong, and everything changed. Their telescopes, more sophisticated than ours even now, detected something moving through deep space, something that shouldn't exist according to their physics, something that violated their understanding of how the universe worked. Not a planet following orbital mechanics. Not an asteroid tumbling through the void. Not a comet with its predictable path. Not anything they could properly categorize within their frameworks of knowledge. It was described in their texts as an absence, a void, a place where things cease to be, where the normal laws of physics seem suspended or negated. Parker struggled to understand the concept, his engineer's mind trying to fit the descriptions into categories he understood. They're describing something that isn't there. How do you observe nothing? How do you track something that has no mass, no energy signature, nothing to detect? Their descriptions sound like they're talking about a hole in space, but that's not physically possible, unless it's a black hole, and the way they describe its movement doesn't match black hole behavior at all. Because everything around it disappears, Paul explained, pointing to the astronomical charts carved into the chamber walls, showing star fields with gaps, with absences where stars should have been. Stars, planets, light itself. You don't see the thing directly. You can't because it either doesn't exist in a way our instruments can detect, or it actively prevents detection. But you see what it's taken away. You see the holes it leaves in the fabric of space. Imagine looking at a star field and suddenly a star winks out. Not goes supernova with a dramatic explosion. Not fades gradually as it exhausts its fuel. Just ceases to exist between one observation and the next. Then another star nearby disappears. Then another. A spreading zone of absence eating holes in the cosmos. They'd watched it for 7 generations. Their entire civilization mobilized to study this phenomenon, to understand it, to find a way to stop it or escape it. Every telescope pointed towards it. Every physicist working on theories to explain it. Every engineer designing ships to flee it, shelters to hide from it, weapons to fight it. Though, how do you fight something that isn't there? Something that makes things stop existing? The best minds of their civilization focused on this single problem for over 200 years, and in that time they watched it move closer, steadily, inexorably, like a tide that cannot be stopped. It moved slowly from their perspective, taking decades to cross distances that light covered in months, but it moved deliberately, with purpose, if not consciousness, through their galaxy. Entire solar systems would suddenly vanish from the night sky, stars they'd catalogued and studied for generations, not exploding in supernovae that would be visible across the galaxy, not collapsing into black holes that would distort space around them, simply ceasing to exist as if they'd never been, as if the universe was being edited and the stars were being removed from the manuscript of reality. Planets with their own civilizations perhaps, their own hopes and dreams, erased without anyone to witness their ending, except distant observers who could only watch in horror. They sent probes, unmanned craft carrying their best instruments, programmed to approach the zone of disappearance and gather data. The probes stopped transmitting when they reached a certain distance, not gradually losing signal as they moved away, but suddenly, catastrophically, one moment sending data and the next simply gone. They sent crewed missions against the advice of their best scientists, volunteers who knew they wouldn't return, hoping to gather some final piece of data that would explain what they faced. Those ships stopped transmitting too. Nothing ever came back. Nothing ever survived long enough to report what it felt like to encounter the absence. They built vast telescopes orbiting instruments that could see in every wavelength, that could detect the faintest whisper of radiation from the edge of the universe. They developed theories and models, brought together the greatest minds from every nation, shared all their knowledge in unprecedented cooperation, because the threat transcended politics and borders and ideology, and gradually, with growing horror that must have felt like drowning in cold water, they realized the truth that their descendants would carve into stone for us to find. It couldn't be stopped, couldn't be communicated with, because it didn't seem to be alive in any sense they understood. Couldn't be understood through any framework they possessed, any physics they'd developed, any mathematics they'd invented. It existed outside their categories of knowledge, outside their ability to even properly conceptualize. It simply erased things, removed them from existence, and it was moving toward Earth with the inevitability of entropy, of gravity, of all the fundamental forces that cannot be negotiated with, or reasoned with, or stopped. On September 22nd, Paul finished translating the final inscription on the central pillar, the culmination of their message, the words they'd chosen to send across the abyss of time to whoever might come after. We recorded him reading it aloud, his voice steady despite the trembling of his hands, despite the tears running down his face, despite the knowledge of what these words meant. The translation isn't perfect. Some concepts don't map cleanly onto human language, but this is as close as we can get to what they wanted to say. We are the inheritors of silence. Those before us left no warning. We will not make the same mistake. When you read this, you live in the time between. The Watcher moves in cycles measured in hundreds of thousands of your years. It has passed through our realm and moved beyond. For your entire civilization's existence, it has been dormant, traveling through the vast dark between galaxies. But it will return. The pattern is eternal. We mapped its course through the heavens. When it wakes, you will see the signs. Old stars will dim without explanation. The southern void will begin to grow. Your instruments will detect nothing, because there is nothing to detect. The absence spreads. We built our greatest cities, we reached beyond our world. We believed we could escape. We were wrong. There is nowhere it does not reach. We seal ourselves here so that memory of us survives, so that you know we tried. We fought. We failed. Watch the southern sky. The coordinates are marked in the chambers above. When the ancient stars begin to fade, you will have one generation to make peace with your existence. We could not run, neither can you. The universe is older and darker than we imagined. May you face the end with more courage than we possessed. We are the last witnesses of our world. Now we pass that burden to you. The silence after Paul finished reading was absolute, crushing, the weight of 250,000 years of warning pressing down on us. Even the ever-present hum of our equipment seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. I could hear my own heartbeat, Parker's breathing, the tiny sounds of Paul's fingers adjusting his camera. Nothing else. The chamber absorbed sound like the stone absorbed light, creating a void of noise that matched the void in space they'd described. Justin's voice crackled over the radio, small and young and frightened. Please tell me that's metaphorical. Please tell me they're describing some kind of religious belief, some mythology, not actual observation. Please tell me we didn't just find proof that the universe periodically erases everything in it. Parker was already working on his tablet, hands flying across the screen, pulling up star charts from multiple astronomical databases, cross-referencing the coordinates carved into the chamber walls, checking against historical records. The stars they mentioned, the ones in the southern sector, the ones they marked as critical to watch. His voice had gone flat, emotionless, the way it did when he was processing something too big to feel. What about them? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know, wanted to stay in ignorance, just a little longer. Parker looked up, his face ashen in the harsh LED lights, his eyes wide and dark. 3 of them aren't in our current charts. They exist in historical records, stars that ancient astronomers catalogued and studied, but they're not in the sky anymore. We've been attributing it to observational error, to the limitations of ancient instruments, to misidentification. But they gave us exact coordinates, and those coordinates are empty now. Those stars are gone. Over the next several days, we worked with observatories worldwide, sharing our findings through encrypted channels, sending them coordinates and asking them to verify what they saw, or more accurately, what they didn't see. The astronomical community was skeptical at first, understandably so, because we were essentially asking them to confirm an impossibility. But as we provided more data, more precise coordinates, more details from the carvings, the skepticism turned to concern, then to quiet panic as they checked their archives and realized we were right. The stars the builders had marked existed in historical records spanning thousands of years of human observation. Chinese astronomers had catalogued them 2,000 years ago, noting their positions with impressive accuracy. Greek records mentioned them. Ptolemy had included them in his star catalogue. Medieval Islamic scholars had mapped them as part of their sophisticated astronomical traditions. Renaissance observers had noted them in their increasingly accurate charts, but in the last 2 centuries they'd vanished, attributed to dust clouds obscuring them, to measurement errors in the older observations, to the limitations of early telescopes, to any number of natural explanations that let us avoid the uncomfortable conclusion that stars simply don't disappear. Until now. Until we had a framework for understanding what their absence meant. They weren't just warning us, Paul said, staring at the astronomical charts we'd compiled, matching ancient observations to modern starfields, seeing the gaps. They were showing us proof. The thing they saw, the thing that erased their world. It already came through this sector of space. These missing stars are its trail. The absence has already been here. It came, and then it left, and we never knew because we didn't exist yet to witness it. So it's already gone? Justin asked, a note of hope creeping into his voice. It already passed through here and moved on? We're safe? It's someone else's problem now. Parker shook his head slowly, checking his calculations again, hoping he'd made an error, but knowing he hadn't. Yes, but their calculations suggest something else. The charts show its path, not just where it came from, but where it went. It moves in cycles. It passed through our region of space, then continued outward, into the space between galaxies, out into the cosmic void where there's nothing but darkness and the faint traces of the cosmic microwave background. But somewhere out in that deep dark, according to their models, it reaches a turning point. And then it begins the return journey. How long? I asked the question we all needed answered. The question that would determine whether this was our problem or a problem for our distant descendants. How much time do we have? Parker looked at his calculations, checking them against the builders' astronomical notations, trying to translate their time measurements into our years, accounting for differences in how they might have calculated orbital periods and stellar motions. If their mathematics translate correctly, and if I'm understanding their astronomical notations properly, if their observations were as accurate as they seem to have been, then we might have 10,000 years, or we might have 100. The uncertainty comes from not knowing exactly where in its cycle the thing is now. It's been 250,000 years since they made these observations. It could be just starting its return journey, or it could be halfway back already. There's no way to be certain without finding it and tracking it. And even if we could find something that's defined by its absence, by the time we detected it, it would probably be too late to do anything about it. On October 2nd, we made the decision to evacuate the site, to leave this tomb and return to the world of sun and wind, to bring back what we'd learned and let others decide what it meant. We documented everything we could, photographed every wall, collected tissue samples from the preserved remains, filled notebooks with observations and translations and measurements. There was nothing more to learn down here without bringing in specialized equipment, without mounting a proper archaeological expedition with teams of experts, and we all felt the increasing need to see the sun again, to feel warmth on our faces, to escape the oppressive weight of all that stone and ice and ancient death. But as we prepared to ascend, as we packed our equipment and took our final photographs, the complex began to tremble in a way that had nothing to do with our presence. It started as a low rumble, felt more than heard, transmitted through the stone itself, vibrating in our bones. Then the shaking intensified, becoming violent enough to knock loose equipment off our makeshift tables. Dust fell from the ceiling in streams, thick enough to choke on. Cracks appeared in the ancient walls, hairline fractures spreading like lightning, the black stone finally succumbing to time and pressure after holding for 250,000 years. "It's collapsing," Justin shouted over the radio, his voice nearly lost in the roar of falling stone. "The whole structure is coming down. The borehole is starting to cave in. Move now. Get to the ascent point now, or you're not getting out." We ran through the corridors as the city fell apart around us, our headlamps bouncing crazily, showing glimpses of catastrophic structural failure. Massive blocks of stone, each weighing tons, crashed down from the ceiling, hitting with impacts that shook the ground. The floor buckled and heaved as supporting structures gave way. The carefully engineered chambers, intact for longer than human civilization has existed, were collapsing in minutes, the weight of the ice above finally claiming what it had been pressing on for epochs. Parker was hit by falling debris, a glancing blow that sent him sprawling, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. Paul and I grabbed him, one arm each, hauled him upright, half-carried him towards the borehole, stumbling over rubble, dodging falling stone, running for our lives through a dying tomb. The winch was still functioning. Justin had kept it running, bless him, ready for our ascent. We made it to the harness as a section of ceiling collapsed behind us, sealing the corridor we'd just escaped through, cutting off our route back into the city. Not that we wanted to go back. Not that there was anything left to see. The city was destroying itself, carrying out one final function programmed by its builders 250,000 years ago. We clipped into the harness with shaking hands, blood and dust and fear making everything more difficult. Justin activated the winch, hauling us up fast, faster than was safe. But safety was relative when thousands of tons of ancient architecture were collapsing below you. The ascent took forever, the cables shaking with vibrations from below, swaying sickeningly as the borehole walls transmitted the destruction happening in the depths. At any moment, I expected the borehole itself to collapse, to cave in and entomb us in the ice, to seal us in with the builders, to make us part of their eternal witness. But we made it, bursting out onto the surface like swimmers breaching after a deep dive, gasping in the brutal Antarctic air that suddenly felt like the sweetest thing I'd ever breathed. Justin pulled us out, dragged us away from the borehole, and we lay there in the snow, watching as the ice beneath us settled and compressed as the complex below crushed itself into oblivion. When we went back to check with ground-penetrating radar, the complex was gone, every trace of it. Collapsed completely, chambers crushed into rubble, corridors compressed into nothing. The borehole had caved in, filled with shattered ice and pulverized stone, the passage sealed as thoroughly as if we'd never drilled it. 9,000 feet of ice and demolished architecture lay between us and the archive, an impossible barrier that no rescue mission could penetrate, no future expedition could bypass. Paul stood watching the radar screen, his face unreadable, a mix of grief and awe and understanding. They designed it that way. One civilization reads the message, then it's sealed forever. We were meant to find it, but only once. Only us. No one else will ever see what we saw. The physical evidence is gone. All that remains is our testimony, our photographs, our translations, and who's going to believe us? We flew out of Antarctica on October 5th, leaving behind the endless ice and the buried secrets it now held more tightly than ever. We carried our documentation, our samples, our photographs, and our testimony. everything we'd gathered during our time in the city, but we also carried something heavier, something we couldn't pack in cases or upload to servers. We carried the knowledge that we weren't alone in the universe, that intelligence had risen before, and that it had failed to save itself from something vast and incomprehensible. The response when we returned to civilization was complicated, multifaceted, exactly what you'd expect when you tell people their worldview is wrong. Multiple governments immediately tried to classify our findings, to lock down the information, to control the narrative. Agents visited us separately, asked us to sign non-disclosure agreements, suggested that sharing this information would cause panic and serve no useful purpose. But we'd already transmitted our data to academic institutions worldwide, sent encrypted files to colleagues we trusted, scattered the knowledge too widely to be contained. The information was out there, impossible to completely suppress, though they tried. A sanitized version was released to the public through carefully controlled channels. An interesting archaeological discovery, possible pre-human structures found beneath Antarctic ice, controversial dating that required further verification, probably natural formations, misinterpreted by over-eager researchers. The official statements were careful to include words like alleged and unconfirmed, and requires peer review. The public reaction was predictable, the usual cycle of brief interest followed by skepticism and dismissal. Most people moved on within a week, treating it as just another wild claim, another hoax, another attempt at fame by scientists who couldn't get attention through legitimate means. Social media had its usual feeding frenzy, debating whether we were deluded or lying, whether the photos were faked, whether the whole thing was a publicity stunt. Within a month, it was forgotten, buried under newer controversies and fresher outrages. But within astronomical and scientific circles, something different happened. Something quieter and more concerning. Quietly, without fanfare or public announcements, funding for deep space observation programs increased substantially. New telescopes were commissioned, not for the usual purposes of finding exoplanets or studying distant galaxies, but specifically for monitoring certain sectors of sky. The southern celestial sector we'd identified was designated for priority observation by the International Astronomical Union, given resources normally reserved for tracking near-Earth asteroids or monitoring the Sun. Scientists who knew what to look for began watching, recording, compiling data that would never be publicly released. Parker took a position at Cerro Paranal Observatory in Chile, one of the premier astronomical facilities in the world, specifically because it has clear views of the southern sky year-round. He spends every clear night watching the coordinates the builders left us, monitoring stars that might be about to disappear, looking for the signs they warned us about. He sends me reports weekly, encrypted files full of measurements and observations, tracking stars that might be dimming, watching for gaps in the cosmic tapestry. He doesn't sleep much anymore. Neither do I. Paul returned to his university in Munich, ostensibly to resume his normal teaching duties, but his real work is completing the translation of every symbol we photographed, working with a quiet network of linguists who know what they're translating, even if they don't fully believe it. He's found more warnings, more details about the builders' final days, descriptions of what they saw in the sky as their world ended. Nothing that changes the fundamental message, but details that make it more real, more immediate, more terrifying. He's found poems, if that's the right word for them, verses carved by individuals who knew they were writing the last words their species would ever produce. He's found children's handprints pressed into soft clay that hardened over ages, preserved in sealed chambers, tiny hands reaching across time, asking to be remembered. He calls me sometimes, usually late at night his time, and we talk about what we found, about what it means, about whether we should be doing more to prepare. Justin went back to civilian life in Houston, returned to the family he'd left for the Antarctic season. He got married last month to a woman who knows what he found but has chosen to live as if that knowledge doesn't matter. He told me he wants to have children, to live a normal life, to not spend every day thinking about the end, to build and create and love, even if it's all temporary. He sent me a video of his daughter's first birthday party, a beautiful little girl with his eyes and her mother's smile. She's laughing at something off camera, delighted by the simple joy of cake and presents and people who love her. He wrote in the email, "People ask me if I regret going down there, if I wish we'd never found it. I watch her laugh, and I think maybe it's better most people don't believe us. Let them live, really live. Let them have families and make plans and believe in the future, because what's the alternative? Tell everyone the universe is periodically erased and watch society crumble. Let them be happy while they can." Maybe he's right. Maybe ignorance is a gift. Maybe the builders did us no favours by leaving their warning. What can we do with this knowledge except let it eat at us? Let it poison every moment of joy? With the awareness that it's all temporary, all doomed, all meaningless in the face of cosmic forces we can't comprehend or control. Parker disagrees. He thinks we should tell everyone, prepare everyone, mobilise every resource we have. But prepare for what? The builders had generations, and they couldn't find an answer. They had technology that rivaled ours, maybe exceeded it in some ways. They had thousands of years to study the problem, to develop solutions, to find some escape, and they failed. They ended up sealing themselves in underground tombs and leaving warnings for whoever came next. What makes us think we'd do any better? I stayed in Antarctica, signed on for another season at McMurdo Station. Couldn't bring myself to leave. Something about being close to where they spent their final days, where they sealed themselves away from a dying world, where they carved their warnings and hoped someone would listen. I can't seem to function in the normal world anymore. Can't make small talk about weather or politics or sports when I know what I know. Down here, surrounded by ice and silence, it's easier to process, easier to think, easier to accept. It's November 19th, 2025 now. 3 months since we found the city. 3 months since we read their warning. 3 months since the world changed, even though the world doesn't know it yet. 3 weeks ago, a star in the southern sector dimmed, HD 163296, a young star about 400 light-years away, bright enough to be tracked consistently. It dimmed by 17% in one night, a change so dramatic that multiple observatories noticed immediately. Parker confirmed it, running every test he could think of, checking for equipment error, comparing measurements from different instruments. 3 independent observatories verified the measurement, all seeing the same thing, the same inexplicable dimming. It could be anything, I tell myself, probably is anything. Dust clouds passing in front of the star. Cosmic phenomena we don't understand yet. Natural stellar processes. Some quirk of the star's composition or age. There are 100 possible explanations that don't involve cosmic erasers slowly working their way back toward Earth, but I think about them, about those final days the builders must have experienced, how they must have felt watching their stars disappear, one by one, watching the night sky develop holes, watching the universe slowly edit itself around them. Did they feel what I'm feeling now? This combination of dread and fascination? This inability to look away, even though every instinct says you should? 2 more stars in the same region have dimmed since then. Smaller changes, barely detectable, the kind of variation that could easily be natural. But Parker sees them. He tracks them. He sends me the data every night. Spreadsheets and graphs and measurements. Building a case that something is happening in that sector of sky. Something that matches the builder's descriptions. The pattern is there if you know where to look, if you know what you're looking for. Could take 10,000 years to reach us, could take less. Could be nothing at all, just natural stellar variation that happens to match ancient warnings through sheer coincidence. I don't know which possibility terrifies me more, that they were right and something is coming, or that we found their tomb and inherited their fear for nothing, that we're seeing patterns where none exist, that we're letting ancient nightmares haunt us when we should be living our lives. The thing that terrifies me most isn't the waiting, though the waiting is terrible. It's knowing they were more advanced than us. They had longer to prepare. They understood the threat more completely than we can with our limited observations. They threw everything they had at the problem, mobilized their entire civilization, worked for generations to find a solution, and they couldn't stop it. They couldn't escape it. They couldn't even understand it well enough to fight it properly. In the end, all they could do was seal themselves in tombs and leave warnings. That was their final achievement. Not salvation, not escape, just warnings. Paul calls me sometimes, usually late at night, his time when he can't sleep, and his mind won't stop processing what we found. He talks about the translations, about the smaller inscriptions we're still decoding, about the personal messages left by individuals who knew they were writing the last words anyone from their world would ever see. Last week, he told me about the final line, the one carved smallest at the base of the central pillar, the one you'd only see if you were standing right next to it looking for hidden text. He translated it carefully, checking each symbol multiple times, consulting with other linguists, making sure he had it right. When he was certain, he read it to me over the satellite phone, his voice breaking on the last words. "Forgive us, we should have done more." They felt guilty, not for causing the catastrophe. They didn't cause it. It came from outside, from beyond their control. But guilty for not stopping it, for not warning future civilizations better, for not finding a solution that could be passed down, for sealing themselves in their tombs with knowledge instead of answers. They left us everything they knew, carved it in stone, preserved it for 250,000 years, and they still felt it wasn't enough. Still felt they'd failed in some fundamental way. What does it mean that they felt guilty? What were they apologizing for? For not being smart enough? For not having more time? For the simple fact of being mortal and limited and unable to stop forces that operate on cosmic scales? Or were they apologizing for what they knew we'd feel when we found their warning? The burden of knowledge without power, the weight of understanding without the ability to act, the curse of knowing the end is coming without being able to prevent it. Justin sent me a video last week of his daughter's first birthday party. She's beautiful, perfect, laughing at something off camera with pure, unfiltered joy that only small children can achieve. The video is 3 minutes long. She's opening presents, smearing cake on her face, toddling around with that unsteady walk they have at that age. Everyone around her is smiling, celebrating, living in the moment without any awareness of ancient warnings or dimming stars or cosmic threats. He wrote in the email, "People ask me if I regret going down there, if I wish we'd never found it, if I could go back, knowing what I know now, would I still descend into that city? Would I still open those doors? Would I still read that message?" I watch her laugh, watch her experience the simple joy of being alive, and I think maybe it's better most people don't believe us. Let them live, really live. Let them have families and make plans and believe in tomorrow. Because what's the alternative? Tell everyone the universe periodically erases things and watch society crumble? Let them know that everything they build, everything they create, everyone they love, it's all temporary, not just on human timescales but on cosmic ones, that there's something out there that makes all our struggles meaningless? Let them be happy while they can. Let them have birthday parties and weddings and graduations. Let them make art and write books and build buildings. Let them fall in love and have children, and believe those children will have futures. Because maybe they will. Maybe the builders were wrong. Maybe we have 10,000 years. Maybe whatever's out there will miss us entirely. Maybe we'll be the exception. Or maybe we won't. Maybe we'll end up like them, sealing ourselves in tombs and leaving warnings for whoever comes after us, if anyone does. But until then, let them be happy. Please, Jake, let them be happy. Maybe he's right. Maybe ignorance is a gift we should give to as many people as possible. Maybe the builders' warning should stay buried with them, sealed under the ice, forgotten by everyone except a few astronomers watching the southern sky, and a few scientists carrying knowledge they can't share. Parker disagrees vehemently. He thinks we have a moral obligation to tell everyone, to prepare everyone, to mobilize every resource humanity has. He sends me long emails arguing that even if we can't stop what's coming, we should try, should throw everything we have at the problem, should at least die fighting instead of dying in ignorance. He thinks the builders would want us to try, that their warning wasn't meant to make us give up, but to give us a head start on preparations. But prepare for what? They had technology that exceeded ours. They had thousands of years to work on the problem. They had global cooperation, every nation working together, every resource devoted to survival. And they failed. They built shelters that only delayed the inevitable. They sealed themselves underground and waited for the end, because there was nothing else they could do. What makes us think we'd do any better with a fraction of their preparation time? What makes us think our technology, primitive compared to theirs, would find solutions they couldn't? What makes us think we're special enough to escape something that's been happening for longer than stars have existed? Most nights, I stand outside McMurdo Station and look up at the stars. They're bright down here, away from all light pollution. The southern sky spread out like a canvas of diamonds. Billions of them. More than you can count. More than you can comprehend. The Milky Way is a river of light cutting across the darkness. The Magellanic Clouds hover on the horizon like pieces of the galaxy that broke off and drifted away. And I look at that sector, the one they marked, the one Parker watches every night through instruments worth millions of dollars, the one that might be developing holes that won't be visible to the naked eye for years or decades or centuries. The stars are still there, for now, every single one they warned us about, still shining, still sending light across the void, still pretending everything is normal. But I know what the builders knew. I carry their warning in my head, carved into my memory as deeply as they carved it into stone. The stars are temporary. Everything is temporary. Not just on human timescales, not just the heat death of the universe in trillions of years, but on timescales we can comprehend. Centuries, millennia, maybe less. The builders wanted us to know we're not alone in the universe, that intelligence has risen before, will rise again, that consciousness isn't unique to humanity. But they also wanted us to know the universe is indifferent to intelligence, to civilization, to hope, to all our achievements and dreams and struggles. Somewhere out there in the space between galaxies, something is moving. Something that's been moving since before stars had names, since before galaxies formed, since before anything existed that could observe and wonder and fear. Something that erases rather than destroys, that removes things from existence as if they'd never been, that leaves no trace except the absence itself. And one day, whether tomorrow or 10,000 years from now, whether in my lifetime or in a future so distant, my species might have evolved into something else entirely, it will return. It will sweep through this region of space again, following the same path it followed before, the same path it's followed for longer than we can comprehend. The builders couldn't stop it, we won't either. We're not special, we're not the chosen ones, we're not exempt from the rules that govern the cosmos. were just the latest in a long line of intelligences that rose, achieved consciousness, looked out at the universe in wonder, and discovered that wonder isn't enough. But at least now someone knows we were here. Someone will remember. 9,000 feet beneath the Antarctic ice, sealed under the weight of ages, the builders are still down there, still waiting in their chambers, still watching through 250,000 years of darkness, still hoping their warning mattered, that someone found it, that their final act had meaning. And now we watch too. Parker at his observatory, Paul with his translations, Justin with his daughter, me at the bottom of the world, as close to their tomb as I can get. The sky is clear tonight, clearer than it's been in weeks. The stars are bright, brilliant, almost painful to look at. I can see the southern sector from here without a telescope, just a patch of sky that looks like any other patch of sky. Nothing unusual, nothing frightening, just stars doing what stars do. One generation, they said. When the stars begin to fade, we'll have one generation to make peace with our existence. One generation to say goodbye to everyone we love. One generation to finish whatever we think is important. One generation to decide whether we face the end with courage or fear or resignation or defiance. I don't know if that's begun already. I don't know if those dimming stars mean anything, or if they're just natural variation that will be explained away by better observations and more complete theories. I don't know if we have centuries or years, or if it's already too close to matter, but I know this. Every clear night I come out here to the ice, to the place closest to where they died, to the tomb that collapsed and sealed them forever. I look up at those ancient lights, photons that left their stars when humans were still figuring out fire, travelling across the void to reach my eyes at this exact moment. And I watch. We all watch now. For as long as the stars remain, for as long as there are stars to watch, for as long as we have eyes to see and minds to understand and hearts to fear. The builder's last message wasn't their warning about what's coming. It was that line Paul found, carved so small you'd miss it if you weren't looking. Forgive us, we should have done more. But what more could they have done? They gave us everything they knew. They carved warnings in stone. They preserved their knowledge for whoever came next. They sealed themselves in tombs so their message would survive. They did everything possible for beings who knew they were doomed. Maybe that's the real message, not the warning about what's coming, but the example of how to face it, with dignity, with purpose, with the determination to leave something behind, even if it's just a warning, even if it's just the hope that someone else might do better. The stars are still there tonight, bright and clear and beautiful. I stand here in the Antarctic cold, breathing air that hurts my lungs, watching light from distant suns, carrying knowledge that weighs more than the ice above the builder's tomb. And I watch, because that's all we can do now. Watch and wait and hope that when our turn comes, we face it with half the courage they showed. The universe is older and darker than we imagined, but for now, for this moment, the stars still shine, and we're still here to see them, for now.